for decades, the partnership between the United States and Saudi Arabia has been one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, one of the most confusing alliances out there. You've got a democratic superpower on one side and an absolute monarchy on the other. So let's unpack exactly why America gives this one nation such a unique and protected status.
To really get our heads around this, we need to look at how America reacts when different countries do, well, pretty similar things. The contrast is where you'll find the key to this whole mystery. Okay, so look at this. It lays out the paradox perfectly. When Russia invades Ukraine, the US responds with crippling sanctions, freezes hundreds of billions of dollars, the works. But when Saudi Arabia leads a devastating military campaign in Yemen, causing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, what does America do? It actively helps them out. We're talking continued arms sales, refueling their jets in mid-air, and even providing targeting intelligence.
And this isn't some new thing. It's a pattern that goes way back. I mean, in 1990, the US sent 500,000 troops to protect the kingdom from Saddam Hussein. And then, after 9/11, even though 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi citizens, there were zero repercussions for the kingdom itself. Time and time again, America steps in to protect Saudi Arabia, no matter what's going on. So this just begs the question, right? What in the world makes this desert kingdom, a country with no nuclear weapons and no major industrial base, so uniquely powerful that the world's only superpower basically acts as its bodyguard?
Well, to find the answer, we have to jump in a time machine. We're going back to 1971, a moment when the United States was facing a true existential crisis, and the entire American economy was teetering on the edge of a complete collapse.
So how did things get so bad? Well, after World War II, the US dollar was king because it was backed by gold. But then, for the next 25 years, the US just printed money like there was no tomorrow to pay for wars and social programs. Other countries, like France, got pretty nervous and started trading in their dollars for actual gold. And then, the final straw. The UK came asking for a massive payout that threatened to literally empty the US vaults.
And the scale of this problem was just staggering. Look at this. The US had about $10 billion worth of gold in its reserves, but there were over $50 billion floating around in other countries. It had promised way more gold than it actually had. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was a global Ponzi scheme. And that led to this historic moment. President Nixon gets on live television and announces to the world that the US is not going to honor its promise anymore. He was officially cutting the dollar's last tie to gold. And just like that, poof, overnight, the US dollar became, well, functionally worthless. It was backed by a promise that had just been publicly broken. The American economy was staring down the barrel of hyperinflation and total collapse. But then, right in the middle of all this chaos, the sharpest financial minds in Washington had this total game-changing realization. It was an idea that would not only save the dollar, but would reshape the entire global economy for the next 50 years. They understood a simple, fundamental truth about the modern world. Gold is a luxury, but oil? Oil is the absolute lifeblood of industry. You can't run a factory, you can't fuel a ship, you can't power a city without it. And guess who was sitting on the biggest and cheapest reserves on the entire planet? Yep, Saudi Arabia. This realization led to a top-secret mission in 1974. The goal? To pitch a deal that would create a brand new system, something we now call petrodollar recycling. It sounds complex, but it's really about creating a loop where all that oil money, the petrodollars, would flow right back into the US economy. And the deal itself was revolutionary in how simple it was. The US offered the Saudi royal family a blank check for military protection. Anything you need, you got it. In exchange, Saudi Arabia had to do two things. One, price every single drop of its oil only in US dollars. And two, take all those billions in profits and invest them back into US government bonds. And here's the masterstroke. Because Saudi Arabia basically ran the OPEC oil cartel, this single move forced the entire world onto the US dollar. If a country like Germany or Japan needed oil to run its economy, guess what they had to buy first? American dollars. This created a permanent, artificial demand for a currency that was now backed by nothing but oil. But wait, the story doesn't end there. The Saudis were smart.
They knew deals could be broken, so they made 3 incredibly strategic moves to make sure their newfound power wasn't just temporary.
First, when it was time to take back control of their own oil fields, they didn't do what Libya's Gaddafi did and send in the army. Oh no, they sent in the accountants. They treated the American oil companies like business partners, creating a huge multi-billion-dollar buyout of Aramco that took years. They even kept the Americans on as paid partners to run the thing. It was absolutely brilliant.
Second, they created this genius political feedback loop in Washington. Think about it. U.S. oil companies make billions from Saudi oil. They then use some of that money for campaign donations to American politicians, and those same politicians then vote to keep the U.S. military protecting Saudi Arabia, which, of course, keeps the oil and the money flowing. It's a perfect, self-perpetuating cycle of power.
And finally, they took their immense wealth and wove it directly into the fabric of the American economy. They own hundreds of billions in U.S. debt. They own critical infrastructure, like the single largest oil refinery in North America. Their trillion-dollar investment fund owns huge chunks of companies you know, like Uber. They literally made themselves too big to fail for the U.S. So, after this wild journey through finance, geopolitics, and strategy, what's the big takeaway? What's the ultimate lesson we can learn from how Saudi Arabia built its power?
Well, here it is. The key is that Saudi Arabia built this unbreakable bond not through military strength, but by creating a system where everyone won. The engineered a deal where America's own economic success became completely tied to the security and stability of the Saudi kingdom. It became a true win-win.
And that leaves us with one final, huge question. For half a century, this petrodollar system has defined global power. But now, as the world slowly but surely starts to shift away from oil and toward green energy, you have to wonder, is the foundation of this incredible alliance finally about to crack?